Hello. Welcome to Undercover, the show that looks between the covers of books by Missoula area authors. My name is Dave Pauli, and I'm director of the Missoula Public Library. And this show is jointly produced by the Missoula Public Library, Fact and Fiction Bookstore, and the friendly folks here at MCAT, that's Missoula Community Access Television. Maybe for our current guests we should say writers from the western Montana area. I'd like to welcome Rick Bass. He's our guest this evening. And he is a writer who lives up in the Yaak Valley, which really isn't very close to Missoula. Actually, how far away is that from here?
It's about 5 hours. I forget how many miles, but about 5 hours.
Okay, yeah. So anyway, Rick's most recent book called Winter, which I just finished reading, is a journal of his first winter that he spent there in the Yaak Valley. Some interesting comments on the people and the place, and I'd just like to ask you a few questions about the book itself and how you came to write it. But in the beginning you described how you found the Yaak Valley, how you decided to live there, and it seemed like it was a combination of serendipity and also you were looking for some specific kind of place. And I wonder if you could talk about that a little, how that all came about.
Sure. My girlfriend and I were living in Mississippi, and I'd been writing there for a couple of years, and I started seeing repetitions in my work, a lot of the same colors, and even characters were coming back, or same kinds of characters. So we wanted to kind of get away from that, and it was real hot there that summer. We wanted to get out of the heat. We couldn't take another summer there, and so we started driving, looking for a place just in the West, anywhere in the West. I'd gone to school in Utah and had been missing the mountains for a long time, and we started out looking in New Mexico, and just kept drifting north and west, and we got all the way over to Washington State and couldn't find what we wanted, which was a big remote place where we could live for free. And so we turned around and we're heading back, and this realtor guy told us about this hunting lodge that needed caretaking, and we stopped in, and there were already some caretakers there, but they had decided that morning that they weren't going to be able to make another winter there. They run out of money or something, and so they said, well, would y'all want to try and take this job? So, and we said yes, and that was 4 years ago. It was serendipity.
And had you been to Montana before, or were you familiar with it at all?
A little bit. I'd been up a couple of times, but not for any extended stays. Just traveling through. Spent some time in Yellowstone, and had been up to Whitefish before, but never to Yaak, and never spent more than like a night in Missoula.
I guess not many people have been to Yaak.
No, it's even in the state, most everybody knows where it is, but it's not it's not a place you go on the way to any place.
And you lived in, or you still live there? You still live in the same place that you
Yes.
wrote the journal?
Yeah.
And you have basically no what we would consider basic amenities like electricity, telephone, or what
Right.
kind of situation is that?
There isn't any electricity. We've got a generator, a propane generator, which we run in the evening. When it's running, it breaks a lot, but it's we fix it, and then it breaks, and we fix it. But there's no phone. We've got indoor plumbing. That's about the only amenity, I guess, that I desire. What else? We've got hardwood floors. Everybody used to think that it was dirt floors when we tell them there was no electricity. It's a fine life. It's more comfortable than when I go to a city. Amenities almost sounds like it's a positive word. We have.
And you don't consider it that way at all?
No, I'm not missing anything, I guess is what I mean to say.
In fact, you, throughout the book, you comment on the positive aspects. And what do you think some of the positive aspects are, aside from, I guess, solitude, or what are some of the other positive things about living there, especially from the point of view of a writer?
Mostly the solitude. That's the most positive thing. That's the thing we sought out the most. You get to see, kind of be farther into the woods and further into nature and observe it. The animals are pretty. There's a lot of animals up there. It's fun to watch those. When we want to go for a hike, we just walk out the back door and literally into was like 40 yards into the national forest, and that's positive, both as for me as a person and as a writer. I think more directly to your question, the things that take care of myself will help me. I write better when I'm happy. I don't write well when I'm upset, and I know some writers do, but I'm not one of them. And so, as long as I can stay happy, I can work okay. And this place makes me real happy.
Mm-hmm. Do you miss anything that we might take for granted in more developed places?
I don't think anybody takes the good stuff for granted, whether they live in city or country. I miss the public radio, or any radio. I don't miss bad radio, but I miss, we miss the public radio. We can't get any radio stations up there. But that's the only thing. The only thing.
Well, this was a little bit of a leap of faith, I take it, for you to go there, because you didn't know anyone there.
Right.
I understand.
Yeah, that's kind of. We're not real gregarious, neither Elizabeth or myself, so it didn't so much bother us that we wouldn't know anybody there, because we hardly ever know anybody wherever we go. But and it wasn't so much a leap of faith as more. It was more, exile or fleeing or something. We just had to get out of that heat and had to. I mean, it seems on the surface like some brave abandonment of, your life and all the comfort that you have around you, but it was not that dramatic. We just got in the truck and went just because we wanted to, and there was really very little at risk. I mean, we didn't have anything to lose.
You do write about days when it was 40 below zero. Was that a shock to you,
Yes,
having grown up in obviously the southeast?
It was a shock. It was more of a psychological shock. Wondering, is it going to go away? What can you do to make it go away? And realizing there's nothing you can do to make it go away. I love the cold. I spent all that time in Texas and Mississippi and love it, but I just got so tired of being hot. And so I love it. It just can't get too cold. But by the same token, it's still a little frightening when you realize that it's in control. You can't, turn a switch and make it be warm if you get tired of it. And usually about what we'll do is we've just got a fireplace to heat this big place. I don't know how many thousands or hundreds, whatever the unit of measurement is. It's a big place. And when we get really cold, we'll take a hot bath, get the water real hot, and then get in the bathtub, and that'll heat your skin and stuff, and then dry off. And we'll go out and ski or something, or snowshoe, but can't really control it. So that was the only thing we had to deal with, was learning to like it. I liked it already anyway.
And you do heat entirely with wood.
Right.
And in fact, one of the central themes in the journal is you out there getting enough wood to get you through the winter, and learning to use a chainsaw. You hadn't used a chainsaw before.
Yeah, that was fun. That was.
It didn't sound like fun to me, but you obviously relished the whole idea of taking on that challenge.
Yeah, well, I enjoy. I mean, it's fun to learn anything new, and man, I don't know anything about machines, so I had to learn, how to take the saw apart and put it back together and keep it clean. It was fun. It was fun. It's just a game. It's fun.
And you did have some sort of people who helped you out or mentored you along once in a while when you got into a problem, like you described, where the saw was not cutting straight.
Right.
And you weren't sure what the problem was, and there were several theories.
Yeah. We're standing around in the woods one day, and these two guys were out cutting near me, and they came over to just see what was going on. They get lonely in the winter, I think, and talk more. You see somebody in the summer, and they won't even wave at you or look at you, but in the winter, it's so funny to be off in, way off in the woods. And these guys just appeared and kind of stood around under the trees and talked, and for a long time, and which is, that's what a writer needs, is to listen to people talking. So anyway, my little saw wasn't cutting straight, and they had different theories. They couldn't figure it out. They'd been cutting wood for 50 or 60 years, and that was a fun day. Yeah.
I guess I was very interested in how you described the people that you met there. There weren't a lot of people. There aren't a lot of people up there, obviously, right. But there are a few, and you don't have any kind of condescending attitude toward them at all. That was, I think, a positive thing about the writing, that these weren't strange misfits or anything like that. But what kind of people are up there in the Yaak Valley besides writers looking for a little seclusion, or what other kinds of people? What draws people to a place like that?
I don't know. I can just guess. I know they're really private people. They're not I guess hermit is kind of a negative word. They're not really hermits as much. It's just they just like to have a lot of space and quiet, and which is why we went up there. So, I'm just guessing. A lot of them up there from Texas or Oklahoma, over half of them, which struck me as strange. And I did a lot of thinking about it the first year. And what I think is maybe, they're all pretty young, 30s and 40s. And when we were growing up in Texas, there's always this, this myth. You'd go see these movies, the Alamo, or How the West Was Won and stuff, and you'd have this notion of the frontier being just west of say, San Antonio, and you get out to Austin and San Antonio, and there is no west. Or not in Texas. So you keep moving to find this movie screen place that you read about. Not even so much a place as a psychology, and they didn't find it, and so they just kept drifting north and west, and they get up against the Canadian line and stop, and you either go on into another country or you stop, and it feels good being up against that line. It feels like you can turn your back around and look back down at the rest of everything. And I guess that's sounding pretty paranoid or misanthropic, but that's the feeling. It's a good feeling for myself, and I think for those other people.
I didn't get the feeling from the book that you were misanthropic or that you had an extremely cynical attitude about the rest of society necessarily.
Well, my editors have a lot to say about that, because they cut out a lot of bitching and moaning and made it a lot more positive book. I've got great editors, and in journal you write what you're feeling that day, and I'd feel good things and I'd feel bad things, and I just put them all down. But that's not going to change anybody's mind to bitch and moan. I guess the best thing to do is just celebrate what's good, and so that's more what remains. But I can get pretty misanthropic, if that's the word, pretty easily. I try not to, but it happens.
Did you feel a sense of, or do you feel any sense of community up there with the other people? You obviously, when necessary, people helped each other, but in one point in your book you talked about how you didn't necessarily ask people. If they were going to help you, they helped you do something. If they didn't want to, they didn't.
Yeah, sure.
But it wasn't a question of calling up or
no.
Talking to people, say, I need help with this project.
Yeah, that's not, it's, part of it is just us, but also part of it is that country. I mean, somebody drives by and you're broken down or something. I mean, it doesn't do good to wave at them, and obviously if they want to help you, they're going to stop, and if they don't, they go on, and it's almost kind of like some code of why we're up there. We're not up there to, if some guy doesn't want to say hi that morning, then it's almost your duty or obligation to not force him into a position where he has to say hi or has to help you. So in that way, we kind of look out for each other by almost staying away from each other. When I'm kind of thinking out loud, but that's how it is. It's real nice. Real nice.
And you obviously prefer that kind of setting.
Yeah, we like. I mean, there's just so much to do that up there we hardly have time for it. So many hikes and just hikes to take and country to see. I mean, if we live up there for 50 or 60 years, there's so much of it that we're not going to see. So many creeks and drainages, and much less ridge tops or mountain tops.
During the time that you were writing Winter, were you ever afraid? There are a couple of things that I noticed. One was the description of how Elizabeth caught her robe on fire. Nobody was around, and then that could have been a horrible tragedy, and it was just narrowly averted, evidently. And then also you cut your pants while you were using a chainsaw. It could have been a lot more serious. You could have cut your leg wide open, I guess. But were you ever afraid of the fact that accidents like that could happen and you would be miles from any help, or did that bother you?
I think about it, but it makes me feel good. It's like, whenever I'm out in the winter or any time of year hiking, if you hurt yourself and you're alone and a long way off, it would be uncomfortable or maybe even bad. I'm always getting lost just I never look at where I'm going. I just start walking and always get lost. And but it's a good feeling. I'm not saying, you know, breaking your leg would be a good feeling, but just knowing that you need not to break your leg is a good feeling. Weren't ever scared. I do remember us being, weird things happened to us up there. I don't like to talk about them. They're so weird. Like, it's a real mystical place at times, and stuff like that happens. Like that time Elizabeth caught on fire, and I cut my leg. We were doing it at the same time. You know, I came home when I cut my pants, fell down and cut my pants. I said, boy, I'm tired. I got to stop and I come home, and she's out there in the front yard, you know, extinguishing her gown. You know, it's like some force is trying to tell us things, and I don't like to talk too much about, you know, it's kind of personal, kind of private. But anyway, it's the right place for us. Stuff is happening to us, and stuff is being taught to us up there.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to just quote a couple things to you. You said, well, one thing, you talked a lot about the season, the winter season, and how people shouldn't get in a hurry or start looking forward too much to spring, but learn to live through the season. Were you able to do that? I mean, those are long, cold winters up there.
I really was, and I don't know if I brainwashed myself or if I'm very simple-minded or something, or very easy to please, but that was something we figured out early on. Was we were so, we'd heard so much build-up about how terrible and long it was and how you just went crazy by January, and you still had February and March and part of April to make, that we convinced ourselves that we're just going to love it, you know, on its own self and not care if it ever ends. And we, you know, we psyched up for that attitude and found out that it was not it didn't take much psyching. It was a very easy attitude to hold for us. And I don't mean to sound know-it-all, because these people up there have been living up there for 20, 30 years, but it still puzzles me when I see them, you know, long about February, complaining, because, I mean, I'm sad because it's going. I mean, it doesn't mean that I don't love spring and summer and fall, but I do get that feeling of loss, and, you know, long about February. And,
you were, in fact, there was a Chinook, February maybe, and everything started to melt.
Over.
That depressed you more than the snow and the ice, I think,
sure.
in the book anyway. What about all this wood you were cutting? Sometimes when you were writing about that, you'd write about the larch trees that evidently are very excellent for firewood.
Yeah.
And you talked about some of the old growth trees, and you seemed a little sad about the fact that much of that is being cut down. Although I don't think you were, I didn't see you as a polemicist about it, but how do you feel about the old growth versus the logging controversy? Do you have some feelings about that?
I do, and again, as the editors kind of saved me from just raging and being polemical and therefore boring and one-dimensional. Yeah, my feelings are, and sadness is the least of it. It's an anger the way most people on that side of the issue feel. The arguments are asinine about the economy. First, it's artificial. You know, it's heavily subsidized. They lose money on that forest, logging it and clear-cutting it, grading it and road building it away the way they do on most of the national forest in western Montana, and saying that it supports the economy. It's the taxpayers in Florida and New Jersey who are supporting that economy. They might as well just give them the money instead of ripping up the forest and the clear cut. And it's ruined the river. There's no fish in the river. The river's still clear and pretty, but there's about that much silt so far all along the bottom, and they can't lay their eggs in the river. You know, they talk about this cutting this old growth, that it's a lot more economical for them to log. I mean, there's what, 3.5% of old growth left on Kootenai Forest. The loggers say there's 7%. Whatever, it's a very tiny amount, and it's going to be gone so quick. Then they're not going to have anything to cut. It's the same argument I saw in the oil and gas industry. You know, it's just commodity waste, and it's people refusing to realize when it's time to abandon that commodity and do something else. But it's basic greed, and that upsets me. It makes me very angry. And it's very hard to live in such a place and be in the middle of such.
I was going to say, you're right. You're really right in the middle of it up there. In one sense.
You know, I can hit the logging trucks with a rock when they pass. Maybe not. I could hit them not with a rock. It's very upsetting. But also it stimulates me. It makes me just run harder. I mean, I'll take out the back door and start running up the hill, up the mountain behind the house, and just be panting and get farther and farther up into the woods. And finally, when you get tired and you get, I know where to go to get away from places, and that makes me feel it. Well, they call it the something of deprivation. The sense that your senses are heightened by deprivation, and so if I can stand there and watch the logging almost till I can't stand it, then it feels even better when I get away from it and get into what I do like, which is old growth or any kind of forest.
Are there people up there that you know that are stridently on the other side of that issue?
Yeah, and a lot of them makes me sad. And this does sound condescending or patronizing. They don't know any better. It's just a culture, which is the hardest thing to fight against. And perhaps who has the right to fight against a culture? You can fight against economic waste and environmental ravages, but to fight against someone's culture, that's almost a thing that you can't fight against, and that's what it is a lot of the times up there. They don't know any better. Sounds patronizing, but it's what their parents told them and their grandparents, and they don't look at the facts. They just look at the culture. And everybody's afraid to change, but I'm starting to sound gentle and forgiving. I'm not. It's just greed is what it is.
So you obviously do have some pretty strong feelings about that. I guess also one thing that really impressed me that you said, and I mentioned earlier, you said in the book at one point, you said actions are a way to communicate, not words. And I thought that was an interesting thing for a writer to be saying. I wonder if you could expand on that just briefly. What do you mean by that exactly?
I feel guilty every day, being a writer, not producing anything or not being. It's like some form of trafficking almost. It's such a illusion. It's not anything real. A book can make you feel a certain way, but it's not anything concrete. And it's like a predator. Like I prey on people's emotions. I write something because I want them to feel what I'm feeling. I want them to feel a certain way. It's does anybody know that quote? I think it's Coleridge or somebody, or maybe Poe, about spiders spinning sticky webs of deceit out his ass or something about, which is what a writer did. Like a writer, just some famous quote, but it's not a very noble thing to be. It's a very standoffish, just predatory thing. Everybody else is out living their lives, and I'm writing about people living their lives. Sometimes it seems like a waste of a life, but on good days, when it's going well, it seems like the best thing in the world.
Yeah. I think you had some good days when you were writing this journal. I certainly enjoyed reading it, and I think many people will.
Oh, thanks.
Find it really fascinating. Well, I wonder if I could just ask you a little bit about, are you going to be doing any promotional work for the book, or are you leaving that to the editor?
No, I'll be doing a bunch of it, which is, I was talking to a guy in Big Fork today. It's like a yin and yang. I mean, you go and seek out all this privacy and isolation, and then I wrote this book, and now I want a lot of people to read it and buy it, and I have to go work toward that end to make them aware of it. So and that'll rattle me so much that I'll just flee back to Yaak and just sit there and quiver for 2 months.
Yeah.
And but I'll do it as long as I can stand it. Which is, I'm not sounding negative. I mean, it's not. It's tiring. But I mean, listen to me whining. I mean, there's people who work 10, 12 hours a day, 6, 7 days a week, and all I do is write for 2 hours a week, and now I'm complaining about, poor baby having to drive, or, for a couple of months or something. Yeah, we'll be doing a lot of travel.
Good. Well, I'd like to thank you for coming to Missoula from the
Thanks.
Yaak Valley and for being our guest here on Undercover. Ms. Rick Bass is our guest today, and the name of the book is Winter, Notes from Montana, journal written during a winter in the Yaak Valley. And I'd also like to take a minute to do a little promo for the Missoula Public Library. We're open 6 days a week now. We're open Mondays, as we hadn't been previously. We're open Monday through Thursday, 10 in the morning till 9 in the evening, Friday and Saturday, 10 until 6. We have a number of programs going on, but I'd like to make a special mention of programs we have for children in preschool age groups. We think it's very important for kids to get exposure to books and reading, and we offer story time for preschoolers, 4 different times of one evening, one afternoon, one morning, and we're very happy to offer those, and we want you to be sure and bring your kids down. And one other thing I'd like to mention, a special new program that we've just started called Book Babies, which is for parents and their toddlers, children from birth to 24 months. That happens on Wednesday evenings, once a month on Wednesdays. And it brings together parents and kids, and we have a special program just for the very tiny kids, and then we also have some kind of a speaker or presentation for the parents. So if you want to know any more about these special programs that we do at the Missoula Public Library, you can call us at 721-BOOK. That's 721-2665. Again, our guest on Undercover has been Rick Bass, the writer of Winter, Notes from Montana, a journal of a winter spent in the Yaak Valley. And again, thank you for being our guest today.
Thank you.
Hello. Welcome to Undercover, the show that looks under the covers of books by local Missoula area authors. My name is Dave Pauli, and I'm director of the Missoula Public Library, and this show is jointly produced by the Missoula Public Library and Fact and Fiction Bookstore. We have as our guest tonight, and we're very privileged to have Barbara Corcoran. Welcome.
Thank you.
Barbara is the author of quite a number of books, but her latest book, Stay Tuned, is one that I've just finished reading, and what a great story, by the way. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you.
And we're going to get into a few questions about the book and the plot and the characters a little later, but I'd like to start out tonight, Barbara, just asking you a little bit about your writing. I did a little research on you, and I read some biographical information, and evidently you've been writing virtually all of your life.
I think since about the first grade.
Oh, that's wonderful. But you were quoted as saying in something I read that the first children's book you wrote called Sam was, and I quote you, quite by accident.
Yes,
Can you
I didn't know
explain
it was a children's book. I thought it was an adult book. But the heroine was, I think, 16 or something like that. And I was thinking, well, Carson McCullers, you know, and other books about teenagers had been adult books. So I thought of it as an adult. I had never thought of writing for children. Mm-hmm. And I sent it to my agent, and she said, this is a good children's book. And I said, that's impossible. I don't know how to write children's books. And she sold it to Athenaeum, and they bought it immediately. So I thought perhaps I could write children's books. Then they asked for another one, and that was the beginning of the role.
And so how are you feeling about that? Do you feel when you write that you have a particular audience in mind or age group?
No, I really don't. I think the publishers tend to, because they feel they have to tell the bookstores and the libraries more or less what age level this is for. But I don't like to think about that, no. Mm-hmm. And since I don't write for very small children, I don't worry about vocabulary or anything like that. I think if they don't know what a word means, let them look it up or wonder about it or skip it.
Yeah. Well, I've noticed also in the information I read about that you've lived in quite a variety of places. You've had diverse experiences. You've been a teacher and a writer, and not just writing books, but writing other kinds of things. And do you think that helps you, that diversity of your experience in your writing?
I think it probably does. I think it's typical of most writers, because you can't make a living very easily just writing. And so I used to take any kind of a job that was vaguely associated with writing, like writing radio copy or advertising copy or whatever. And sometimes ended up just as a file clerk or something and wrote at night. But it wasn't until I wrote Sam and then wrote a couple more books that I decided I'd take the plunge and write full time. I think it's something like 1% or fewer than 1% of the writers, according to the Authors League, in America write full time, can make a living writing full time. So I've been lucky for the last 20 years. Of course, you never know whether you're going to starve that year or do well, but that's the risk you take.
So you're quite an established author now, but you've been through the same thing that many authors have, of rejections and...
Oh, yes, sure. Not so many after I got into children's books. I've had the same editor at Athenaeum for 21 years, which is kind of amazing. And she never says no. She may say, fix it, but she doesn't say no.
And how do you, well, you must have a pretty good trusting relationship with her.
Yeah, we have a very good relationship. She's a wonderful editor, Jean Carl. And she's semi-retired now. And she kept, I think, 12 of her authors. And I was one of the 12, fortunately. But she can't do as many books a year of mine or of anybody's as she used to. I used to do sometimes 4 or 5 a year. But I couldn't do 4 or 5 a year now either.
Well, focusing a little bit more specifically on this book, which is about some children who have been abandoned by their parents for one reason or another, and find themselves pretty much on their own and left to their own devices. Evidently, you have written some previous books with that as a theme or a part of the theme. Do you have affinity or some kind of empathy for kids like that?
No, well, I didn't realize that I had written a number of books about kids who had run away, because these children have not purposely run away. until I read a review of one of my books, and the reviewer said, this is another one of Corcoran's runaways. So I don't know where that comes from. I don't think I ever had any urge to run away myself. It probably is that it puts the child in a different situation where things can happen, and you can think of events and misadventures and so on that more easily than if she just stays home, or he.
Okay, and really these kids really are in situations where things happen to them, and quite a number of things. But they're all, the four young people that come together in this book are from pretty diverse backgrounds. You've got a girl originally from an Iowa farm. You've got two kids who grew up in Brooklyn, and then you've got Alex, the older teenager who was from evidently sort of a wealthy family in New England. Did you create that diversity for a purpose? I mean, do you think that helps the story along?
Well, I think so, yes. Especially the three younger children. Alex is kind of a device, you know. He provides the place and he provides the means of getting there. And he's not as important, I don't think, as a character as the other three are. But he holds the story together. But yes, I like the idea of having the girl from Iowa and the kids from Brooklyn because they had such different backgrounds.
Yes. In fact, Eddie, the boy, when he first meets Stevie, she says she's from Iowa. He said, I thought that was a joke. I didn't know it was a real place. And, well, what about these kids and their abandonment by the parents? I mean, the different reasons for in each case, but...
of course, Stevie isn't intentionally abandoned. Her father thinks that he's sending her to a safe place, and it gets mixed up. And in the case of Eddie and his sister, the grandmother suddenly dies, and the mother has never been around and is not a stable character.
No.
So it's not like, I think one of the reviews of it said these are not like any runaway children that I ever read about. Well, they weren't meant to be runaway children that you read about. They're not street kids. They're not kids who have intentionally run away.
Right.
But these things have happened to them, and then they have to deal with it.
Right. I didn't have very good feelings about Stevie's father or about Eddie and Fawn's mother.
No, you shouldn't have.
No, I realized that, but I didn't think you wrote about them in a judgmental way. But do you think readers are going to judge them harshly? Or?
Well, I hope not. Excuse me. The father has good intentions. He's just not very practical.
Right.
And the mother of the children is just completely, probably not quite with it, you know, and never has been.
Yeah.
And wouldn't have come into their lives at all if the grandmother hadn't suddenly died.
Yes. And the focus is really on the children and not the parents.
Right.
And these children do have an incredible inner strength and resiliency, I think. That's the thing I really noticed about them. And in fact, it seemed to me that quite often children from much more stable family situations than they were from wouldn't have that.
Well, you never know. I think children have a lot of resiliency that maybe isn't called upon, but when it is, I think that they're sometimes better at rising to the occasion than adults are.
Well, these kids certainly were, and it was admirable, and I kept cheering for them all the way through the book. Well, the fact that adults are one of the causes of the difficult situation they find themselves in, there's a corollary to that, though. They keep meeting adults throughout the book who are very kind and help them in some way. And I just wonder, well, there was the man on the train who gave them the $20, and then the waitress who just had a nice, pleasant conversation with Eddie, and then all the people up in New Hampshire when they finally get up there who, in one way or another, were able to help them. What do you think about that? Are there people out there like that who will do that?
Oh, sure there are, yes. And of course, in New Hampshire, there are also some who are not helpful, like the man he works for at the
Right.
grocery store, whereas the old man is. And, you know, there are good people and bad people wherever you go. And in a small town, you find out very quickly. I grew up in a small town, and I know you find out very quickly who is which, you know, which side is apparent.
Right. Well, I have to ask you about this one minor character in there who was the librarian in this town in New Hampshire. I just, this is a bit of an aside, but I wanted to know, she was a very kind and helpful people, and I was so happy when those kids got access to some reading material.
Yes.
I thought that was just a great
I think I have a
touch.
tendency to somehow get my characters into a library sooner or later before the book is over.
good. Was that librarian based on anyone you know, or is
No.
she a compositor? Just
No.
well, you talked a little bit about earlier when we were chatting about questions that you've had from kids about your book. I wonder if you want to discuss that at all.
Well, there are several questions that I always get. 1, 2, 3, bang, 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 right off. In fact, the librarian at the Porter School called me this afternoon to ask me to come over in a couple of weeks and talk to the children. And she started telling me, they've been reading a lot of my books apparently, and she started telling me the kinds of questions they were going to ask. And I said, I know. I've been hearing those for 20 years. One of them is, where do you get your ideas? That's the first one. And I used to find that very hard to answer. And it is hard to answer. But I realized that they really want to know, so I would try to think about it before I talk to them. Because you don't think about it yourself, you know, there they are. If you look back and analyze it, you can figure it out. And then I have written in earlier years some books under a couple of different pen names. And that's the second question. Why do you write under pen names? Well, of course, there are many different reasons why writers write under pen names. The reason I did was that at the time I was doing 4 or 5 books a year for Athenaeum, and they thought that I was competing with myself if they had to list in the spring and fall catalogs 4 or 5 books by one person. So I took the name of Paige Dixon for a while and kept it for quite a few years. I don't anymore. And then one year I started having 5 books, and she said she didn't want more than 2 a year from one name. So I came up with the name of a sort of ancestor of mine who was a writer, the only other writer I know of in my hometown, and she was famous in the 19th century. Her name was Gail Hamilton. And since when I lived in Hamilton, I've been gone now for a long time, but very few people even remembered Gail Hamilton. But the Historical Society has revived her and made a big to-do about her. And I think I realized when I went back there that I think they thought I was kind of presumptuous, you know. Who do I think I am? This is their Gail Hamilton. But I only did 3 Gail Hamiltons, I think. And it's really a disadvantage to take a pen name because you're a new writer then, as far as the critics and the reviewers and the book buyers go. So I was never too happy about I don't write enough books. I do now 1 or 2 a year, so I can use my own name.
And when you talk about Hamilton, you're talking about Hamilton,
Mass.
Massachusetts, right?
Yeah.
So I wonder you have lived a number of places, as I said, taught in a number of places, and what brought you to Missoula?
Well, I went out to Los Angeles after the war, and I'd been there until, let's see, the early 50s, 53, I think it was. And it was just beginning to change. It was a very great place when I first went out there. But you know how Los Angeles has gone.
Right.
And a friend of mine came up here. She had a job. She got a job up here and invited me up to visit. And I was smitten with, I'd never heard of Missoula, Montana. And I mean, I couldn't believe it, you know. So it just worked out that she told me to write to Mosby, who owned KGVO, a radio station in those days. And I did, and he was losing his copywriter, and he offered me a job. So I came, and I was here. I worked for him for a year, and then I went to the university and got my MA the second year. And then I couldn't get a job at the university. They offered me one, and then the legislature went into one of their fits, and with all due respect, and I didn't have a job suddenly in September, so I had to leave. But I always thought that if I did write full time, I'd come back to Missoula, and I did. I came back in 1969.
Great. Well, we're so glad you did.
I am too.
What about promoting this book? Does the publisher do all that? Do you do anything in promotion?
Well, no, not very much. I go around and talk to schools, but I don't do it unless they ask me to, and I don't do it as much as I used to. I used to go quite a lot to writers' conferences, and until the last year or so, I went every spring to Missouri, to South Central or Central South University in Missouri, where they have a 4-day conference. They have 40 writers, and they bring in 8,000 kids.
Wow.
And I finally decided this was getting a bit much. It was lots of fun, but it's pretty exhausting. You know, you're busy every single minute for 4 days. But I used to go to quite a few things like that in Texas and Cleveland, Ohio, all over the country. But I don't do that so much anymore. The publisher, since Macmillan took over, I don't think that they publicize nearly as much, as they don't want to spend the money. They're very bottom line oriented. You know, it's a huge company.
Right. But you, as an established author, now have an in with your name is instantly recognizable to librarians all over the country, and probably to kids too, I'm sure.
Well, I hope so.
Yeah.
Librarians, I think, are the writer's best friends.
We like to think so. Yeah. I wonder if I could get back to a question about the book. I noticed that Eddie is probably rightfully so rather suspicious of adults, and especially suspicious of the whole social service system. I mean,
Yes.
he is convinced that if he gets involved with the child welfare people, they're going to separate
Well, they
he
would.
and his
you know.
sister.
They would.
And yeah, I just wondered, do you basically think our system is working against kids like this?
Well, I don't think it intends to, but I think the problems are so enormous, and there are never enough social workers. At one time in my life, I worked in a social service agency in Los Angeles. It was for old people, when they used to have old age pensions, you know, for everybody got it when they were 72. And those women, they were wonderful people, and it broke their hearts because they couldn't do enough, you know. All the paperwork took up so much time, and they didn't have a big enough staff. And I think it's usually that way. And so often not enough gets done. It's just too big a problem.
Right.
And of course, he's not a street kid, but still, in a sense, he is. He's street smart, and he knows how those things work.
Yeah, and he is smart. He's smart enough to know not to get enmeshed in the drug
Yes.
culture.
Yeah.
Yeah. And also, I thought it was really very moving, the kind of interior dialogue that he had with his deceased grandmother.
Oh, good. I was always afraid that wouldn't work.
I thought it worked very well, and you could see how that gave him strength. I wonder where you got that idea from, or is that something you've had with?
I don't know. No. I suppose something must have given me the device, but I can't remember now what it was.
Well, he I think is really such an outstanding young man, and he perseveres
I like him.
through all this kind of hardship. What about future projects? Are you working on another book, or are you thinking about another one?
Yeah, well, I just mailed one off today, as a matter of fact, and I do have another one in the typewriter. And I suddenly realized a couple of days ago that Marcia's reading this one on
on the pea green boat, and I'd been listening to her, and I got the galleys back for a book that will come out, I guess, next spring. And I had I'd just gotten ready to send this new book off to New York. And I thought, I cannot face that typewriter for a week or so, because I had all these books in my head, and I, was mixing up characters. So, but I like to go pretty quickly from one book to another. I don't like to be not working on a book.
Well, the name of the book is Stay Tuned, and it is about some children who have, for one reason or another, had their whole life disrupted and have their parents out of the picture, and they rely on themselves. Do you think that this is more of a problem now, or are we just more aware of the fact that there are homeless kids in there?
Oh, I think it's more of a problem, yeah.
Yeah.
I wrote a book called The Sky is Falling a few years ago, which is, 2-3 years ago. It's about the depression of whatever it was, 29. And at the time, I was a little concerned about it because books that are what kids think of as historical. I mean, to me, the Depression doesn't seem historical, but to them it does. I was afraid it might not work, but then I thought, we've kind of been going through that same thing. Thousands of workers are getting laid off, and farms are getting taken up by the banks and all that. So I took a chance, and it has done pretty well.
And what about kids' response to this book? Do you think, the characters are very positive, but the situation is very frightening. How do you feel about kids reading about that? Do you think
The situation is very what?
very frightening?
Oh, frightening.
Very, I would say, maybe overwhelming for some kids to read about. What do you think?
Well, I hope it would make them feel the other way. I mean, I think children are constantly faced with terrifying situations these days, and as long as the only thing I don't like about a children's book, I think you can treat almost anything in a children's book, but I don't like despair at the end. And I'm a very great fan of Robert Cormier's, but the end of the Chocolate War has always bothered me, because the kid just gives in and gives up.
Yeah.
And I don't think you ought to send that message to kids.
Yeah. In fact, in some of his other books, the similar message comes through. Well, there isn't despair in this book, I must say, even though those kids have to face some pretty difficult and tough situations. And I think young readers, and actually all readers, would probably enjoy this book, Stay Tuned.
Well, I hope so.
I'm sure they will. I certainly did. And I want to thank you very much for being our guest
Well,
today
thank you
on
for having
Undercover.
me.
And appreciate the fact that that you have written a number of books. So Stay Tuned is just the latest. And if anyone wants to see any others of hers, we have quite a number of them at the library, I'm happy to say. Any other particular books that you can think of that might be similar in theme to this that we should mention the titles of? Or is it?
Well, similar to this, I suppose I should start thinking of my books where the kids run away. Some of the early ones, I tried to stop doing that for a while after that reviewer said that, because I thought I don't want to be known as the author of Runaways. But there's an early one that is still fairly popular. I think it's called, what is it called? I'm always forgetting my titles. It's about a Montana girl who lives with her grandfather in an abandoned mining camp, and he gets ill, and she has to make a trip the length of the state. She goes down to Butte on her horse, and in a very different kind of way, has sort of the same sort of problems. She doesn't know how to deal with civilization, really, because she's lived in such isolation. So the long journey.
The long journey.
Yes, sooner or later,
Okay.
I remember.
Well, if you come into the library, you can certainly look up the books by Barbara Corcoran. And again, thank you for being our guest
Thank
today
you.
on Undercover. We really appreciate it. The name of the book again is Stay Tuned. I'd like to just take a few minutes to tell you a little bit about things that are going on at the library this summer. You probably know, if you're a regular library user, that we do a summer reading program every summer for children. But maybe you don't know why we do summer reading programs. I'd like to just explain a little bit about that in the brief time we have. We know through all the research that people have done about kids and reading that if children read through the summer and read for pleasure, that their reading skills not only are maintained but actually increase. So when they go back to school in the fall, they're ahead of where they were. And so we think it's real important to encourage kids to read, and encourage them to read because it's fun. You know, there are no assignments, there are no worksheets, there are no tests. But reading in the summer is fun, and that's why we do these summer reading programs. And we think it's very important for children and for children to participate. So let me tell you, this summer, on Tuesdays during June and July at 1:30, we'll be having an activity program for kids, school-age kids. And for preschoolers, ages 3 to 5, during the month of July, except on July 4th, we'll be having a preschool story time on Thursdays at 1:30. So we would like all of you to bring your kids down to the library or send your kids down to the library. And if you need more information about programs that we're doing for children this summer, please call us at 721-2665. That's 721-BOOK. And I'd like to thank the technical crew and MCAT for helping us with this show tonight. And again, I'd like to thank Barbara Corcoran for being our guest.
Thank you. I've enjoyed it.
You're welcome.